The room was deathly silent as Emma, my daughter-in-law, and the new CEO stood at the head of the table, her voice cold and final. "We don't want outdated people in this company anymore. Your services are no longer needed, Maren." My heart sank as the words echoed in the room, each one feeling like a stab. The 23 employees, once my team, now mere witnesses to my professional death. As I packed my things, my mind raced with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. But then, as I stood up, a familiar face entered the door. My son, Mitchell, the one person who could have stopped this. I smiled at him, not showing a hint of the storm raging inside. "I'm glad you're here," I whispered under my breath. But the smile was a mask. What was really going on here? Moren, at 65 years old, had built this company from the ground up. She'd seen its humble beginnings and watched it grow into the strong, successful enterprise it had become today. She had sacrificed everything, her personal time, her energy, and her own ambitions, for the family business. More importantly, she had placed her family above all else. Everything she did, every decision she made, was for the sake of her husband, her son Mitchell, and even Emma, her daughter-in-law, whom she had welcomed with open arms 3 years ago. But today, everything felt different. The room was suffocating as she sat in the sleek, modern conference room with all 23 employees. The same room where she had celebrated the company's many milestones. The same place where she had made life-changing decisions for the future of the business. Now it felt like a tomb. Emma, the new CEO, stood at the head of the table, her sharp gaze cutting through the room. She was beautiful, confident, and poised. Everything Maren had never been able to be in the corporate world. She was the embodiment of everything the company was supposed to be, sleek, modern, and ambitious. But at that moment, Maren couldn't shake the feeling that Emma's ambition was something much more sinister. She had seen it from the very first time she'd met her. Emma was calculating. She never seemed to care much about family, just about control. "I'm sorry, Maren." Emma's voice rang out coldly, slicing through the tension in the room. "We've decided that your role is no longer necessary. We don't want outdated people in this company anymore." The words hit Moren like a punch to the stomach. Outdated. That was the word Emma had chosen to describe her. The woman who had given everything to this company. The woman who had built it from scratch. Moren felt her heart drop. Her years of hard work, the countless sacrifices, the moments she had put aside for family, none of that mattered anymore. All of a sudden, she was being discarded like yesterday's news. The room fell silent. No one said a word, but Maren could feel the weight of the stares upon her. There were familiar faces, employees who had worked alongside her, employees she had mentored, employees she had supported throughout the years. They all seemed to hold their breath, unsure whether to speak or not. Moren's mind raced. She could feel her pulse quicken, but she knew she had to keep it together. She couldn't let this moment break her. Her hands felt cold, but she forced herself to remain composed. She wasn't going to cry, wasn't going to give Emma the satisfaction of showing weakness. As Emma's words hung in the air, Moren did something she never expected. She didn't scream, didn't beg, and certainly didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded, her face a mask of quiet resignation. "Well," Moren said calmly, her voice steady despite the turbulence inside, "I suppose that's that." She stood up slowly, the weight of the decision not just from Emma, but from the company as a whole, pressing heavily on her shoulders. The fluorescent lights above seemed to hum louder in the tense silence. She walked toward the table to gather her things, her movements deliberate and measured. Her heart was beating in her ears, and yet somehow she managed to keep a sense of calm. She reached for the notepad and pen she had used in countless meetings, the same ones that had been with her since the early days when the company was just a dream. Her fingers brushed against the paper, the familiar feeling of the pen grounding her as she quietly slipped the items into the box. She could hear the faint sobs of Sarah from accounting in the background, and Tom from marketing looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. It was clear that Moren wasn't the only one feeling the weight of this moment. but Moren couldn't bring herself to look at them. She couldn't afford to. "Good luck," Moren said softly to Emma, her voice quieter than before, almost as if the words didn't belong to her anymore. It was a final, parting statement. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. Just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being underestimated. As she turned to leave, she didn't expect to hear the voice that came next. "Moren, wait!" called a voice from across the room. It was James, an older employee who had worked under Moren for years. He had been with the company since the early days. Moren had always thought of him as a loyal, trustworthy ally. His voice was thick with emotion. "This isn't right. You built this place. You don't deserve this." Moren stopped in her tracks. She hadn't expected anyone to speak up. She had always assumed that the loyalty she had built over the years was solid, but she didn't realize how much the current atmosphere in the company had changed until now. Turning back toward him, she gave him a soft smile, though her heart wasn't in it. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice betraying no emotion, no anger. "But sometimes change is necessary." She could see the hurt in his eyes, and for a moment, she almost regretted not fighting for the company. But then she remembered, this wasn't about the company anymore. It was about her. It was about her dignity, her pride, and the years of hard work that would be forgotten the moment she walked out of that room. As she made her way toward the door, Moren's heart swelled with an unfamiliar mixture of pride and sorrow. She had given everything to this company, but now she had nothing left to give. Moren carefully placed the last of her belongings into the cardboard box. Each item, her favorite mug, a few family photos, the small cactus plant she had kept in her office for years, felt like a symbol of the life she had built. It was strange how quickly it all seemed to unravel. Just moments ago, she had sat at that conference table, surrounded by the people she had mentored, the people who had once looked up to her, only to now be dismissed by Emma's cold words. The finality of it all weighed heavily on her chest, but she held back the tears. Tears would be a sign of weakness, and Moren wasn't about to show any weakness now. She had been through too much to break down in front of these people, especially Emma. As she zipped up her bag and gathered the last of her personal items, she tried to steady her breath. She knew she couldn't let herself crumble. The future was uncertain, but she had to face it with her head held high. Moren paused for a moment as she turned to leave. The familiar sounds of the office, the hum of the air conditioner, the clatter of keyboards, the murmur of conversations, seemed strangely distant now. The life she had known for decades was slipping away, and in its place was an unfamiliar, cold silence. She stepped out of her office and into the hallway, carrying her box like a trophy of defeat. Her heart ached, not just because of Emma's betrayal, but because her own son, Mitchell, was nowhere to be found. Mitchell, her only son, the one she had raised alone after his father passed away when he was just a teenager. He was the one who had been her greatest joy and her greatest challenge. She had sacrificed so much for him and for the family business. So why wasn't he here? Why hadn't he stood up for her? Why wasn't he fighting for their family's legacy? Moren couldn't help but feel betrayed by him as well. As she made her way toward the elevator, the weight of the betrayal from both Emma and Mitchell hit her. She had raised Mitchell to be a strong man, a man who would stand up for what was right. But here he was, absent when she needed him most. And instead, it was Emma, the woman she had so warmly welcomed into her family, who had torn it all apart. Emma, who had come in with her sleek beauty and Ivy League education, sweeping Mitchell off his feet, was now using him to carry out her own ambitions. Moren felt the anger rising in her chest, but she quickly quelled it. She couldn't afford to lose control now. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, cradling her box tightly. As the doors closed, she took one last look at the office, now a place of memories. The office that had once been filled with laughter, conversations, and planning for the future was now silent, like a tomb. The ride down to the ground floor seemed to take forever. Each passing floor was another layer of time she would never get back. Mitchell should have been there. He should have seen what Emma was doing to his mother. The last time she had spoken to him, he seemed distant, distracted, like he wasn't fully there. He had been so wrapped up in his work, in Emma's world, that he had barely noticed what was happening around him. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, Maren stepped out and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor, a steady rhythm that echoed through the empty space. The building, which had once been her second home, now felt foreign, unwelcoming. She pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the bright sunlight. The fresh air felt like a slap in the face, as if the world outside was moving on while she stood still. Moren's mind raced. She had been so focused on the company, on keeping everything running smoothly for years, that she had overlooked the subtle changes in Mitchell and Emma's relationship. Over the past few months, she had noticed a shift in Mitchell's attitude. He was more distant, more focused on the company's future, and less concerned with his family's needs. And Emma, with her perfect smile and polished persona, had skillfully maneuvered her way into Mitchell's life, subtly pushing Moren out. But it wasn't just that. James, an old employee who had worked under Moren for years, had dropped a bombshell during their brief conversation just before she left the office. "Emma has changed, Moren," James had whispered, looking around nervously before lowering his voice. "She's been acting strange ever since Mitchell really started working full-time at the company. It's like she's got him wrapped around her finger. I don't think he even sees it." Those words sent a chill down Moren's spine. She had seen the signs, of course. The way Emma would always pull Mitchell away from family events, the way she would whisper in his ear during meetings, but she had never imagined it would come to this. Emma had already begun to replace her in Mitchell's life, and now, it seemed, she was replacing her at the company as well. Moren's heart sank even further as she realized that everything she had worked so hard for was slipping through her fingers and she was powerless to stop it. She walked toward her car in the parking lot, her mind clouded with thoughts of betrayal and regret. She had done everything right, hadn't she? She had built the company from the ground up, and for what? To be discarded when she was no longer useful? To be replaced by a younger, more ambitious woman who didn't care about the family bonds that had held the company together for years? Moren slid into the driver's seat and started the car, the engine rumbling to life beneath her. The familiar hum of the engine should have been comforting, but today it just felt hollow. She glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of her reflection. The woman staring back at her looked older, weary, and broken. But she wasn't done yet. Moren would find a way to reclaim her life, to prove that she was more than just a casualty of time and ambition. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Moren wasn't going down without a fight. She may have been forced out of the company, but her fight for her legacy, her family, and her own self-worth had just begun. Moren stepped into her home, the door clicking shut behind her with an eerie finality. The familiar smell of coffee and the faint scent of old books seemed to wrap around her, reminding her of simpler times when she and Mitchell would sit at this very table, discussing everything from school grades to his dreams for the future. Now the house felt emptier than ever. As she walked into the living room, she glanced at the photographs on the walls, the memories frozen in time. Mitchell as a child, grinning with his toy truck, his school pictures proudly displayed with the highest honor. Each image seemed like a reflection of the boy she had raised, the boy who had once trusted her, completely. Now the boy she had fought so hard to protect seemed so distant. His absence at the meeting today, when he should have been there to support her, weighed heavily on her heart. She should have known something was wrong. How many times had she seen those subtle signs? Mitchell's reluctance to spend time with her, the way he would avoid family gatherings or cancel their weekly lunches, all in favor of meetings or late-night work. She had chalked it up to his growing responsibilities, but now it was clear. He was being pulled further and further away from her by Emma. Moren sat down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she set the box down in front of her. She wasn't sure what to do next. The world she had known seemed to be crumbling around her, and all she could do was sit in the quiet, waiting for answers that might never come. As she opened the box to unpack her personal items, her mind began to wander back to the early years, when Mitchell was a little boy, still so full of life, still so dependent on her. She remembered the days when they would bake cookies together, laughing as flour flew everywhere. How she would pick him up from school, his face lighting up when he saw her, always eager to tell her about his day. Back then, he didn't have any walls, no secrets. He would share everything with her. They had been a team, just the two of them, and nothing could break that bond. Or so she had thought. Her hands hovered over the small picture frame in the box, Mitchell's graduation photo. She hadn't realized how much time had passed until she saw it. The boy she had raised was now a grown man, and somehow she had lost her place in his life. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and she felt a tightness in her chest. She had always been there for him, through thick and thin. She had given everything for him, but somehow, somewhere along the way, she had missed the signs. Emma had come into their lives so quickly, and while Maren had tried to be welcoming, she hadn't seen the subtle manipulations, the quiet shifts in power that were happening right before her eyes. She thought back to when Emma had first entered their lives, a whirlwind of confidence and charm. At first, she had been relieved. Mitchell had been single for so long, and here was a woman who seemed to complement him so perfectly. But soon, Moren had noticed the little things. Emma's insistence on controlling certain aspects of their family life, the subtle way she always managed to steer Mitchell's decisions away from his mother's input. At first, Maren had brushed it off, thinking it was just normal behavior for a new daughter-in-law, but now she wasn't so sure. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked at the screen and saw Mitchell's name. She hesitated before answering. It wasn't like him to call after what had happened today. Was he calling to apologize? Or was he going to tell her he was too busy to talk, too involved in the company to deal with family matters? Mom? His voice sounded strained, a little too distant for her liking. Mitchell, she replied softly, trying to keep the emotions out of her voice. I wasn't expecting your call. I just wanted to check in on you, he said, his voice faltering slightly. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mitchell, she replied, though the words didn't feel right. She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine in a long time. But what could she say? That everything was falling apart? That she felt abandoned by him, by the one person who should have been her ally? There was a long pause on the other end. Moren could almost hear the hesitation in his voice, the uncertainty. She could tell he was trying to say something, trying to find the right words, but nothing came. I heard about the meeting, he finally said. About Emma. I'm sorry it had to happen like that. It's not about the meeting, Mitchell, Moren replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. It's about what happened before the meeting. Where were you? Why didn't you stand up for me? Why weren't you there? I didn't know it was going to go like that, he said, his voice defensive. I was in Seattle for work. I didn't think she would actually— She did, Moren interrupted, her voice growing more emotional. She fired me, Mitchell, in front of everyone. And you weren't there. You didn't even know what was going on. I didn't know, Mom, Mitchell repeated, his voice lower now, almost apologetic. I didn't know she would do that. But I couldn't be there. Why not? Moren asked, the hurt in her voice now unmistakable. Why couldn't you be there for me? After everything I've done for this family, after everything I've sacrificed, why are you letting her do this to me? I don't know what to say, Mom, Mitchell admitted, the weight of guilt and confusion heavy in his words. I thought I was doing what was best for the company. I thought you would understand. Moren took a deep breath, her anger slowly turning to sorrow. You're not listening to me, Mitchell. It's not about the company, it's about family, and you've forgotten that. The call ended with an awkward silence between them, and Moren sat there, staring at the phone in her hand. Mitchell wasn't the boy she had raised anymore. He was too wrapped up in Emma's world, too controlled by her to see what was really happening. Emma wasn't just after the company, she was after him too, and Moren knew that if she didn't act soon, she would lose everything. Moren sat at her kitchen table. the dim light from the overhead fixture casting long shadows across the room. Her mind raced with the events of the day, Mitchell's phone call, Emma's betrayal, and the increasing sense of isolation she felt. She had tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on something else, but the feeling of unease gnawed at her. She could still hear Emma's cold words echoing in her mind. "We don't want outdated people in this company anymore." But it wasn't just Emma who had betrayed her. It was Mitchell, too. He hadn't stood up for her. He hadn't fought for her. Instead, he had been absent when she needed him the most, choosing work over family, choosing Emma over his own mother. As the evening stretched on, Maren could feel the weight of the silence in the house, a silence that felt increasingly oppressive. She glanced over at the papers she had pulled from her desk earlier that day. It had started innocently enough, just a quick review of the company's financial reports. She had been curious, perhaps even a little worried, about the direction Emma was taking the company. But now her curiosity had turned into something much darker. She had started with the usual quarterly financial reports, scanning them for irregularities. At first, everything seemed in order, but the more she looked, the more inconsistencies she found. Small discrepancies, nothing major at first. A few numbers didn't add up. A few invoices were marked as pending, but had already been paid. But then, as she dug deeper, the pattern became undeniable. There were transfers of money, large amounts moving from the company's main operating account to an account she didn't recognize. The more she looked, the more the transfers appeared. Small sums at first and then increasingly larger ones, always approved by two signatures, one from Emma and the other from someone with the initials MP. Her heart raced as she traced the transactions. She didn't need to be an expert to recognize the pattern. The money was being moved to an account that seemed to be connected to a third party, someone completely outside of the company. Emma had been siphoning off funds, and she had covered her tracks well, making it look like a legitimate business transaction. But Maren wasn't fooled. She quickly printed out the documents, her hands shaking as the printer hummed softly in the background. The paper slid out of the machine, and she looked down at the printed figures, her mind racing. She couldn't ignore this. Emma had been playing a game, and now she had the proof. But there was something else in the reports that stood out to her even more. A set of transactions had been approved by the initials MP, Moren's son, Mitchell. His signature, or at least a signature that resembled his, appeared on these documents, and it made her blood run cold. How had this happened? How could Mitchell have signed off on these transfers without realizing what they were for? Or was he involved in something much darker than she had ever suspected? Moren slammed the papers down onto the table, her heart pounding in her chest. Emma had lied to her. She had manipulated Mitchell. But the question was, how much did Mitchell really know? Was he aware of what Emma was doing? Was he complicit in it? Or was he being controlled by Emma in ways he didn't even realize? She couldn't sit with this feeling any longer. She had to confront Mitchell. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Just as she was about to grab her phone, the doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Maren stood up, a sense of foreboding creeping over her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, there stood Mitchell, his face drawn and tired. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Moren felt a lump form in her throat. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. She couldn't help but notice how different he seemed, more distant, more guarded than she had ever seen him before. As they walked into the living room, Mitchell sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What's going on, Mitchell?" Moren asked, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. She didn't want to confront him with everything she had found just yet. She needed to know where he stood first. I don't know how to explain this, Mom," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been thinking about what happened today, about what Emma did to you, and I feel like I've been missing something. Like there's a side of this I didn't see." Moren nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had hoped he would say something like this, but hearing it still stung. She had tried for so long to protect him from the harsh truths, but now it seemed like he was starting to see things for what they truly were. "Mitchell, there's more going on here than you realize," Moren said softly. "I found something today. Something that you need to see." Yet, she handed him the papers she had printed, and he took them hesitantly, scanning the figures on the page. His face slowly drained of color as he read through the transactions. His eyes widened as he reached the part where the initials MP appeared next to the approval signatures. I didn't sign these," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This isn't my signature." Moren's heart sank. She had been hoping for this confirmation. She needed him to understand. Emma had been manipulating him, and now it seemed like the truth was finally coming to light. "You didn't sign them, Mitchell," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But Emma, she's been using your name to approve these transactions. She's been siphoning money from the company." Mitchell's face twisted with disbelief, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was reading. How could she do this? How could I have missed it? Moren sat down beside him, trying to offer him some comfort, but there was no easy answer. The trust between them had been shattered, and now they both had to face the consequences of Emma's actions. "I don't know, Mitchell," she said quietly, "but you have to understand this isn't just about the money. Emma, she's been using you. She's been pulling you away from this family, from me. I'm not the only one she's been manipulating." Just as Mitchell looked up at her, his expression darkening, he said, "I need to talk to Emma. I need to find out what she's been hiding from me." Before he could say anything else, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed Emma's number. Moren watched him with a heavy heart, knowing that the conversation would be nothing short of a confrontation that neither of them was prepared for. The moment that had been building for months, even years, was finally here. The weight of the information Moren had uncovered felt suffocating as she sat at her desk, the files spread out before her like a map of deceit. She had never imagined she would find herself in this position, digging through financial records, following traces of money and secrets, uncovering things she wasn't sure she wanted to know. But as she scrolled through the transactions again, the same question kept gnawing at her. How could she not have seen this coming? The name Marcus kept appearing in the records. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, just another name on an invoice here and there. But as Moren dug deeper, she realized that Emma had been transferring money to an account under Marcus's name. Large sums, amounts that didn't make sense in the context of the company's routine expenses. There was no legitimate business reason for the transfers, no explanation on the accounting sheets. Every time she thought she had reached the end of the trail, there was another link in the chain, another suspicious detail. The first few transactions had been small, easily overlooked. A few thousand here, a few thousand there, easy to explain away as part of regular business dealings. But then the amounts began to grow, tens of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands. The most recent transfer had been for $50,000 approved by Emma, and a mysterious second signature that looked suspiciously like Mitchell's, though he had denied authorizing any of the transfers. Moren couldn't shake the feeling that she was falling deeper into a labyrinth of lies and manipulation. She had spent so many years building this company, pouring her soul into it, believing in the integrity of the family and the business. But now, everything was starting to fall apart. The family she had trusted most, the one she had dedicated herself to, was being torn apart from the inside. She leaned back in her chair, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Emma had always seemed so perfect, so poised, so ambitious. But now, as Maren uncovered more about her, it felt like the woman she had welcomed into her family had been playing a long game, one that involved betrayal on a level Maren wasn't prepared for. The truth was becoming clearer by the minute, but it was a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The file on her desk with the name Marcus printed on it felt heavy in her hands. She had tried to convince herself that she was imagining things. After all, Mitchell had never given her any reason to doubt him. But the more she pieced together, the more it seemed like Emma had been manipulating not just the finances, but also Mitchell. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she had wrapped him around her finger, pulling him away from the family, away from Moren. Moren picked up her phone and dialed Mitchell's number, her hands trembling slightly. It had been days since they had spoken, and even though he had seemed distant before, she still couldn't help but hope he would finally understand. This had gone far beyond the business. It was about family, about trust, about everything she had worked for. But how could she tell him what she had uncovered? How could she risk their relationship, especially when she didn't know if he would believe her? "Hello?" Mitchell answered, his voice soft, almost cautious. "Mitchell," Moren began, trying to keep her voice steady, though it felt like 1,000 emotions were flooding through her all at once. "I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it, Mom?" he asked, and Moren could hear the tension in his voice. It was clear he was on edge, unsure of what she was going to say. "I've been looking into the company's financials," she said, her voice quieter now. "There are things I've discovered that I think you need to know." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment, Moren thought that maybe Mitchell would finally listen, finally see the truth. But then, his voice came again, laced with hesitation. "What do you mean, Mom?" he asked, his voice still distant but with a hint of concern. "I don't understand what you're saying. What did you find?" "I found transfers," Moren replied, trying to keep her tone calm. "Large sums of money that's been moved into an account under the name Marcus, a man I don't even know. I'm not sure what's going on, but the money is being moved around for no apparent reason, and some of the signatures on the transfers look like yours." There was a long silence before Mitchell spoke again. "What are you trying to say, Mom?" "I'm trying to say that Emma has been using the company's funds for something that doesn't make sense," Moren said, her voice growing more desperate. "I don't know how much you know, Mitchell, but you need to look into this. I think she's been manipulating not just the company, but you as well." "Moren, this is a lot to take in," Mitchell replied, his voice cracking. "I need time to process all of this. Are you sure about this? Are you certain it's her?" "I'm certain, Mitchell," she said, her heart aching at the thought of what she was asking of him. "I need you to trust me on this." Another silence stretched between them, longer than any silence they had shared before. Moren waited, hoping that he would come around, that he would see the truth. But instead, he finally spoke, and his words were like a punch to her stomach. "I can't just take your word for it, Mom. I need proof," he said, his voice firm now, though tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Was it fear, anger, or just disbelief? "I have proof," Moren replied, her voice breaking slightly. "But I can't do this alone. You have to help me. We need to confront Emma together." There was another long pause before Mitchell finally spoke again. "I'll think about it, Mom," he said, before ending the call. Moren sat there staring at the phone in her hand, the silence hanging thick around her. She didn't know what to do anymore. The man she had raised, the man she had trusted, was now standing on the other side of this battle. And Emma, she had somehow managed to separate them both, pulling him further away from her, further away from everything they had built together. Moren knew she had to act fast. The longer she waited, the more control Emma would have. But the question was, how much longer could she keep this up without destroying the last shred of trust she had with her son? Moren sat alone in the dim light of her kitchen, the papers she had printed earlier scattered across the table before her. The more she examined them, the clearer it became. Emma had used Mitchell's name to authorize the transfers, masking them as legitimate business transactions. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into an account under the name of Marcus. As she read through the details again, her stomach churned. How could Mitchell not know? How could he be so unaware of the deceit happening under his nose? It didn't make sense. Mitchell had always been so diligent, so meticulous when it came to business. He had been raised with integrity, and yet here was the evidence in front of her, showing that someone had taken advantage of that trust. Moren closed her eyes, fighting the surge of frustration rising inside her. She had always been proud of Mitchell, and now she couldn't help but wonder how far he was really involved in Emma's scheme, or had he truly been manipulated into oblivion? As her thoughts swirled, a part of her realized that there was no way Mitchell could have been entirely blind to what was happening. If he had signed the transfers, if his name had been forged, then it meant Emma was far more calculating and dangerous than she had given her credit for. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and undermining the very foundation of the family. And for Mitchell to be drawn into this, no matter how subtly, made the situation all the more complicated. Her hand shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed Mitchell's number once again. This time, it was an urgent call, one that couldn't wait. When he answered, his voice sounded strained, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "Moren," he said, a hint of frustration in his tone. "What is it now? What have you found this time?" "I need you to look at these documents, Mitchell," Moren replied, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "I've discovered something. You have to see it for yourself." There was a pause, and then Mitchell responded, his tone softer, more cautious. "I told you. I need time, Mom. I've been looking into it, but—" "No, Mitchell, you don't understand. Emma has been using your name to authorize fraudulent transactions," Moren interrupted, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She's been moving large amounts of money into an account tied to a man named Marcus, and your signature, has been forged." There was another long silence on the other end of the line. Mitchell was processing the information, but Maren could hear the disbelief in his voice when he finally responded. "This doesn't make sense, Mom. I didn't authorize anything. How could I not remember doing that? I've been so focused on the company lately. And maybe I missed something." "I don't think you missed it," Maren said, her voice hardening. "I think Emma has been manipulating you from the start. But there's more. There's someone else involved." "Someone else?" Mitchell asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "What do you mean?" "I've been digging deeper into the company's financials, and I found something else. Someone who's been helping Emma cover her tracks," Moren explained. "It's James." "James?" Mitchell repeated, sounding shocked. "He's one of the senior managers. What do you mean he's involved?" "He's been helping Emma hide these transactions," Maren replied, her heart sinking at the thought of James, the man she had once considered a trusted ally. "I confronted him earlier, and he confessed. Emma told him to go along with everything, to keep quiet about the money transfers. He's been taking orders from her the whole time." The revelation hit Mitchell like a ton of bricks. He had worked closely with James for years, and the idea that his longtime colleague could be involved in something so underhanded left him speechless. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to believe anymore. "Moren, I don't know what to think," Mitchell said quietly. "I've trusted these people. I've trusted Emma. I don't understand how this all happened." Moren sighed, her own frustration rising. She had been fighting this battle alone for so long, and now Mitchell was starting to question everything. But the worst part was, she couldn't blame him. Emma had played her cards perfectly, using Mitchell's trust in her to cover up her manipulations. Mitchell was caught in the middle, unsure of who to trust, his mother or his wife. "I know this is hard, sweetheart," Moren said softly, her voice breaking with the weight of her emotions. "But you need to see this for what it is. Emma has been using you to get what she wants. You've been drawn into a web of lies, and we need to figure out how deep it goes before it's too late." "I'll look into it," Mitchell said, his tone flat. "But I need more time. I can't just jump to conclusions without understanding everything. I need to see for myself what's been going on." "Fine," Moren replied, a sense of defeat creeping into her voice. "But time is something we don't have much of, Mitchell. Emma has already done a lot of damage. You need to act before she destroys everything." As the conversation ended, Moren felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had hoped that Mitchell would be the one to confront Emma, to see through her lies, but instead, it seemed like he was retreating further into the comfort of denial. He wasn't ready to face the truth. Maybe because he didn't want to believe it. And who could blame him? Emma had been everything Mitchell had ever wanted, and to realize that she was behind everything that had gone wrong felt like a betrayal he couldn't yet process. Still, Maren couldn't wait for him forever. The stakes were too high. She had to act. She would confront Emma, and she would make sure that the truth came out, no matter the cost. Just as Moren was about to gather her thoughts, the doorbell rang, interrupting her. She walked to the door, her heart racing. When she opened it, there stood James, his face pale, eyes darting nervously. "Moren," he began, his voice trembling. "We need to talk." The day had come. Moren stood at the window of her living room, staring out at the quiet street. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her chest. For days she had been collecting evidence, following the trail left behind by Emma. Today, she would confront her, face to face, and demand answers. Emma thought she had won, thought she had everything under control. But today, Maren was taking back the reins. She took a deep breath, looking at the folder in her hand. The papers inside were damning. Transfers, signatures, and invoices that proved Emma's guilt. She knew that she had to approach this with calm, with control. If she let her emotions take over, she risked losing everything. This wasn't just about the company. It was about her family. Her son, Mitchell, had been manipulated, and he still didn't see it. But he would, soon enough. If not today, then she would make sure he would see the truth, no matter the cost. Maren gathered the evidence, each piece neatly placed in the folder, and grabbed her purse. It was time to go to Emma. She couldn't wait any longer. She had waited long enough for Mitchell to come around, but the truth had to come out, and it had to come out now. The cafe was quiet when Maren arrived. The soft murmur of conversation and the clink of coffee cups, the only sounds filling the air. Emma was already sitting at a corner table, her back straight, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. She didn't even look up when Moren approached, as if she hadn't been expecting this moment, or maybe, just maybe, she thought she had won. Moren sat down across from her, the folder between them on the table. Emma's eyes flicked briefly to it before looking back up at Moren, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So," Emma began, her voice smooth but cold, "I didn't expect you to come. I thought you'd just give up. Go back to your quiet life." Moren's gaze was unwavering. "This isn't over, Emma," she said firmly. "I know what you've been doing, and I'm here to make sure the truth is heard." Emma's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh? And what truth is that? The truth that you're too outdated to understand the business? The truth that you're no longer needed?" Moren felt the sting of the words, but she didn't flinch. "You've been using the company's funds for personal gain, Emma. I have the proof." She pushed the folder across the table, the papers inside rustling as it slid closer to Emma. For a moment, Emma didn't speak. She simply stared at the folder, her expression unreadable. Moren waited, letting the silence stretch between them, giving her the space to process what was happening. She knew Emma had been confident, but now it was time to break that confidence, to expose her for who she truly was. Finally, Emma sighed, leaning back in her chair as she let the folder sit untouched in front of her. "You don't understand, Moren," she said, her tone condescending. "This is the future of the company. This is the way forward. You were holding things back. You've always been too sentimental, too focused on the past. You couldn't keep up with the changes, with the competition. The company needed someone who understood the real world, who could think strategically. I thought you'd understand that." Maren could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Emma was still trying to justify her actions, trying to paint herself as the victim, the one who was merely doing what was necessary for the company's survival. But Moren knew better. She had seen through Emma's carefully constructed facade long ago. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me," Moren said, her voice steady but filled with fury. "You didn't want change. You wanted control. You wanted to tear this family apart, and you used your position to do it. You've been using Mitchell to do your bidding, and now you've been siphoning off company funds. I know everything." Emma's eyes narrowed as she took the folder and opened it slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly as she scanned the documents inside. The evidence was irrefutable. The transfers, the signatures, the amounts. Emma had no way of denying it, but she tried anyway. "This is ridiculous," Emma scoffed. slamming the folder shut. "These transactions were for investments. I was protecting the company. You don't understand, Maren. You're so stuck in your ways that you can't see what's really going on. The world is changing, and you're too old to keep up." Maren leaned forward, her gaze cold. "No, Emma. It's you who doesn't understand. You think you can manipulate everyone, but you're not going to get away with it. Mitchell will find out what you've done. And when he does, you won't have a leg to stand on." Emma stared at her, a look of venom in her eyes. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. "You think you can tear me down with your little folder of papers? You don't know anything about what I've sacrificed to get where I am. You've always been in the way. Always in the way of progress." Moren's eyes softened, just a fraction. "This isn't about progress, Emma. This is about greed. This is about you taking everything that was built over decades and ruining it for your own gain. You've destroyed our family for your ambition." At that moment, the door to the cafe opened, and the soft chime of the bell above it seemed to break the tension in the air. Both Moren and Emma turned, but it wasn't Mitchell who walked through the door. It was someone far more unexpected. It was James, the man who had once been a trusted member of the company, the man who had turned against her. Moren's heart sank as he walked toward their table, his eyes darting between them. He hesitated before sitting down next to Emma, looking uncomfortable but resigned. "I had to come, Moren," James said quietly. "I didn't want to, but Emma, she told me what I had to do. I didn't have a choice." Moren looked at him in disbelief. "You helped her cover this up, didn't you? You knew everything, and you chose to stay silent." James lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I had no choice," he whispered. "Emma promised me. She promised all of us that we would be taken care of. She promised I wouldn't lose everything. I didn't think you'd understand, but now I see what she's done. I see it all." Moren's heart twisted. She had never expected James to be the one to betray her. The man she had trusted for so many years had become another pawn in Emma's game. "Well, now you know, James," Moren said softly. "You're part of the problem, too." The tension in the cafe was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words and emotions too complex to articulate. Moren sat there facing Emma, her anger tempered by the cold realization of how deep the betrayal ran. James had just confirmed the truth she had feared. Emma had been manipulating everyone around her, using her position to line her pockets and tear apart the family Moren had spent decades building. But as Moren gathered her thoughts, ready to press on with her confrontation, the door to the cafe opened again. This time, the person who walked through the door wasn't another customer. It was Mitchell. He paused when he saw them, his eyes scanning the scene in front of him, his mother sitting across from his wife, the tension so thick that it felt suffocating. His confusion was evident, the moment stretching long as he hesitated in the doorway. Moren's heart sank. This was the moment she had dreaded. Mitchell, still naive, still so wrapped in Emma's web, had walked into the storm. Mitchell stepped forward, his gaze flicking between the two women, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Maren, then at Emma, and the confusion in his eyes was painful to watch. "Mitch," Moren said, her voice steady but laced with a sadness she couldn't hide. "I've been trying to tell you the truth, but now you need to hear it from her." She gestured to Emma, who hadn't moved an inch. For a moment, there was a strange stillness in the room. Emma didn't speak, didn't try to explain herself. She simply sat there, her expression unreadable, behind her perfectly crafted facade. But then, as if deciding that there was no point in pretending anymore, Emma turned to face Mitchell, her lips curling into a smile, one that was cold and calculating. "Mitchell," Emma began, her voice dripping with feigned innocence, "I know this must be so hard for you, but you've got to understand I did this for us, for the future of the company. You can't be stuck in the past. You can't keep holding on to these old ways. You and I are meant to move this company forward, to make it something that will last." Mitchell blinked, clearly struggling to understand the words. "What are you saying, Emma?" His voice cracked, betraying the confusion and hurt he was feeling. "You've been moving money around? You've been lying to me, to all of us?" Emma didn't flinch. "You don't understand, Mitchell," she said, her tone laced with a false sweetness. "It was all necessary. You know how hard I've worked for this, how hard we've worked. If we want to survive, we need to be strategic. The old way is just outdated. You don't want to be part of the past, do you? You don't want to hold us back." Moren's heart clenched as she listened to the words that came so easily from Emma's lips. She had seen Emma manipulate Mitchell before, but this was something else entirely. It was clear now that Emma had planned all of this from the beginning. She wasn't just after the company. She was after Mitchell. And by extension, she was after the future Maren had always imagined for their family. "Stop, Emma," Maren said, her voice firm now, cutting through the manipulation. "We both know this isn't about the company. This is about power and greed. You've been using Mitchell. You've been using all of us." Emma's smile faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly recovered. "And what do you think you're doing, Moren?" she sneered. "Still clinging to the past, still holding on to your old ways? You can't keep pretending that things haven't changed. Mitchell and I are the future. You're just in the way. You always have been." The words hit Maren like a slap, but she didn't let it show. She was done with pretending, done with trying to placate Emma. She had the evidence, and she wasn't going to let Emma get away with it any longer. With a quiet but resolute gesture, Moren reached for the folder, sliding it across the table toward Emma. "Here, these are the transfers you've made. And this," Moren continued, pulling out a specific page, "this is a transfer from Marcus's account, your account, to a private account in your name. You've been siphoning money from the company, Emma, and using Mitchell's name to cover it up." The silence that followed was deafening. Mitchell stared at the papers in front of him, his face slowly draining of color as he saw the evidence. Emma's eyes flicked between him and the papers, her confident smile beginning to slip. "Don't you dare try to spin this," Moren said, her voice growing louder now, filled with the strength of years of experience, years of sacrifice. "You can lie to him all you want, Emma, but I know the truth. And now Mitchell knows it too." Mitchell looked from the papers to Emma, his eyes wide, disbelief written all over his face. "Is this true? Did you really?" "Aye." His voice trailed off, as if he couldn't finish the sentence, as if he couldn't fathom what was happening. For a moment, Emma just sat there, stunned, as though she had expected to talk her way out of this. But there was no more talking, no more lying. The truth had come to light, and there was no escape. She straightened her back, and for the first time, her cool, composed demeanor cracked. "Yes," Emma said, her voice dripping with a false sense of calm. "It's true. I've been using the company funds, but it's all for the greater good, Mitchell. I've been doing what's necessary to ensure our future. You should be thanking me for making hard choices." But then, as if to add one last twist to the web of lies she had spun, Emma's eyes flashed with something darker, something dangerous. "But here's the thing, Mitchell," she continued, her smile turning into something almost sinister. "You should know the truth about what's been happening between us. We never had a child together, did we? All those stories I told you about the miscarriage, it was all a lie. There was no pregnancy, no miscarriage. It was all part of my plan to get you to marry me, and it worked. You're mine, and you always will be." The words hit Mitchell like a thunderclap. His breath caught in his chest as he tried to process the truth of what Emma had just revealed. His world was crumbling around him, and he couldn't stop it. Moren watched him, her heart breaking for the son she had raised, the son who had been completely deceived, and for the first time, she knew that no matter what happened next, everything had changed. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur to Mitchell. Everything he thought he knew had been turned upside down. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had married, the woman he had believed was perfect for him, had been lying to him for years. Emma had manipulated him, used him, and the worst part was, he hadn't seen it coming. He had been so blinded by his own desire for success, for power. that he had let her control him, let her pull him further away from the family that had always been there for him. Now, sitting in the quiet of his office, with the evidence in front of him, Mitchell felt the weight of his choices. How could he have been so naive? How could he have allowed himself to be so easily deceived? He looked at the papers that Maren had given him, the transactions, the forged signatures, the money funneled into Marcus's account. It was all laid out, undeniable, and still he couldn't quite believe it. His hands shook as he picked up the phone. It was time to make things right. Moren had been right all along, and now he had to take responsibility for his part in this. He couldn't let Emma destroy everything they had built, couldn't let her continue to manipulate him and his family. It was time to face the truth. "Moren," he said, his voice hoarse, filled with guilt and determination. "I need your help. I've been blind. I've been so stupid. But I can't do this alone. I need to find out everything, every last thing that Emma has been hiding." "I'm glad to hear that, Mitchell," Moren replied, her voice calm but filled with relief. She had known this moment was coming, and now it was finally here. "We'll get through this, together." They spent the next few hours going through everything, Mitchell searching through his own records, trying to piece together the puzzle he had missed. Moren was there with him every step of the way, guiding him, offering support. It was strange how the roles had reversed. Once, Moren had been the one to guide and protect him, but now it was her turn to show him the way. As the afternoon wore on, the pieces began to fit together. They discovered more transfers, more accounts that Emma had set up in secret, all part of her scheme to siphon off money. There were also emails between Emma and Marcus, plans to transfer more funds, and even a few disturbing messages about how Emma had manipulated Mitchell into marrying her. Mitchell felt a sickening knot twist in his stomach as he read through the messages. The realization hit him hard. Emma hadn't just been manipulating him professionally, she had been manipulating him personally. She had used his vulnerabilities, his desire for love and acceptance, to get what she wanted. It was clear now. Everything had been part of her plan. "She used me," Mitchell whispered to himself, staring at the screen in disbelief. "I can't believe I didn't see it. I was so blind." Moren put a hand on his shoulder, offering comfort. "You weren't the only one being deceived, Mitchell. We all were. Emma is a master manipulator, and she's been playing everyone." They continued their investigation into Emma's activities, and what they uncovered was worse than either of them had expected. Emma had been systematically taking control of the company's finances, moving money around to cover her tracks. But that wasn't all. She had also been forging documents, covering up her misdeeds with lies and manipulation. The more they dug, the darker the picture became. Moren glanced at Mitchell as they sifted through the documents. He looked tired, worn down by the weight of the truth. But there was something else in his eyes now, a determination to make things right. Emma had stolen so much from him, from their family, and it was time to take it back. "There's no way I'm letting her get away with this," Mitchell said, his voice resolute. "I won't stand by and let her destroy everything we've built. I'll take her down." Moren nodded, her heart swelling with pride. This was the son she had raised, the man who would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. He had finally come to see the truth, and now, together, they would fight to reclaim everything Emma had stolen from them. As the day drew to a close, Mitchell sat back in his chair, exhausted but focused. They had uncovered enough evidence to confront Emma, but they still had a lot of work ahead of them. The road to exposing her would not be easy, and there was no telling how far Emma would go to protect herself. But Moren and Mitchell were united now. They would stop at nothing to ensure that justice was served. "Do you think she'll come quietly?" Mitchell asked, glancing over at his mother. "I don't know," Moren said, her voice hard with resolve. "But I know one thing for sure. We won't let her win." That night, Mitchell stayed at his mother's house, the house that had always been a safe haven for him, a place where he could find comfort and guidance. It had been so long since they had spent time together like this, just the two of them, working side by side, fighting for what was right. Moren had always been his rock, and now he was beginning to see just how much she had sacrificed for the family, for the company. He had taken so much for granted, and now it was time to make it right. As they prepared to take action, Mitchell looked at his mother, his eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Moren smiled softly, her heart swelling with love for her son. "We're in this together, Mitchell, always have been." The next day they made their move. With the evidence in hand, Maren and Mitchell confronted Emma. It wasn't easy. The woman who had once been part of their family, who had worn the mask of perfection for so long, was now exposed for who she truly was. A manipulative, power-hungry liar who had been willing to destroy everything for her own gain. The confrontation wasn't clean. Emma tried to deny everything, tried to spin the situation in her favor, but the truth was undeniable. Moren and Mitchell stood their ground, refusing to back down. They had the proof, and they weren't going to let Emma get away with it any longer. The moment had arrived. Moren and Mitchell stood together in the conference room, the tension between them palpable. The doors were closed, the room quiet, except for the sound of their breaths. Emma was sitting at the far end of the table, her expression still that of the confident, calculated woman Moren had come to know over the past few years. But now, that confidence was beginning to crumble. The evidence was laid out before her, and there was no denying what she had done. "Moren? Mitchell, what is this?" Emma asked, her voice still trying to maintain that false composure. "This is ridiculous. You have no right to come in here and accuse me of such things. I've done nothing wrong. I'm simply doing what's best for the company." Mitchell stood silently by his mother, staring at Emma, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had seen the evidence, he had read the documents, and he had heard the truth from Maren. But standing here in front of Emma, facing the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted, it was hard for him to accept that everything he had believed was a lie. "Emma, you don't get to twist this," Mitchell finally said, his voice low and filled with frustration. "The evidence is right there. You've been using the company's funds for your own personal gain. You've lied to all of us, and most importantly, you've used me to do it." For a moment, there was silence. Emma didn't speak, didn't try to deny it. She simply sat there, her gaze fixed on Mitchell, her eyes hard and unyielding. But then, something shifted. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of resignation. "You think I did this for the company?" Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did it for you, Mitchell. For us. You've been so consumed with your work, so obsessed with success, that I had to take matters into my own hands. I needed to protect us, protect our future." Mitchell shook his head, a sick feeling building in his stomach. "Protect us? By stealing from the company? By lying to me and everyone else?" Emma's eyes flashed, but instead of becoming defensive, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Yes," she said, the words dripping with cold certainty, "because you didn't see it, Mitchell. You didn't see what needed to be done. You're too weak, too sentimental, just like your mother. The company needed to evolve, and you couldn't even understand that. You were so focused on the past, on the way things were, that you couldn't even see the future. I had to make sure we moved forward. I had to make sure we were unstoppable." Moren stood silently beside Mitchell, her eyes narrowed, watching Emma as she spoke. She could see the cracks in Emma's facade, but she knew that this was just the beginning. Emma wasn't going to go down without a fight. Mitchell's pain was evident in his face, his mind still struggling to come to terms with everything that had been uncovered. But Moren knew there was more. There was something that Emma was holding back, something that would expose her true intentions. Just when Maren thought the conversation couldn't get worse, Emma took a deep breath, her face shifting, and she leaned forward. The smile that had once been calculating now seemed darker, more sinister. "There's something you don't know, Mitchell," Emma said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Mitchell looked up at her, his face tense with confusion. You don't know the real reason why I've been doing this, why I've been controlling everything. It's not just about the company. It's about you, Mitchell. I don't just want the company. I want you." The words hung in the air for a long moment, and Mitchell felt his heart drop. He stared at Emma, unsure of what he had just heard. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely audible. "I've been trying to make sure we have everything we need, Mitchell," Emma continued, her voice laced with a cold determination. "But you, your mother, all of this, everything we've built, has been standing in our way. I can't move forward with you if she's still around, if she's still holding on to you like she does. She's a problem, Mitchell. She's been holding you back from the life you deserve, and I can't have that." Mitchell stood frozen, his mind reeling. Emma wasn't just after the company. She was after him. She wanted him to choose her over Moren, over everything he had known, over the family that had supported him through thick and thin. She was willing to destroy everything to have him completely, to control his life, his decisions, his future. Moren could see the storm brewing in Mitchell's eyes. The man she had raised, the son she had loved and protected, was now standing at a crossroads. She could see the conflict in his face, the tug of war between the woman he had married and the woman who had always been there for him. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but she knew that this was something he had to come to on his own. "You don't get to decide who I am, Emma," Mitchell finally said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I'm not your pawn. I'm not going to let you tear my family apart just because you can't handle the truth." But Emma wasn't done. She wasn't backing down. "If you don't choose me, Mitchell, you'll lose everything. I've already made sure of that. The company, the life we've built, it's all in my hands now. You're either with me or you're against me. And if you choose your mother, you'll lose everything, including me." Moren felt her heart break for Mitchell as he stood there, the weight of the world crashing down on him. Emma had controlled every aspect of his life, and now she was trying to control him completely. Maren knew that Mitchell was on the edge of losing everything. The company, his family, even his sense of self. There was nothing left to say. The damage had been done. Mitchell now faced the choice that would shape the rest of his life. Would he stand by his family, by the woman who had raised him, or would he allow Emma to manipulate him into sacrificing everything he had ever known for the illusion of a perfect life? The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of the choices that lay ahead. Mitchell was no longer just fighting for the company. He was fighting for his own soul, for the very foundation of who he was. The question was no longer whether he could trust Emma. It was whether he could trust himself. The days following Emma's departure were filled with uncertainty, but there was something in the air now, something lighter, something that hadn't been present in the company for years. Mitchell and Maren stood at the helm together, trying to pick up the pieces of the family business and rebuild what had been torn apart. The damage was real, and it had left scars that would take time to heal. But they had a chance, a new beginning, free from the shadow of Emma's manipulation. They spent hours at the office, late into the night, drafting new strategies for the company, making decisions that would shape the future. It wasn't easy. The transition had been hard on everyone involved, but there was a sense of purpose now, something that had been lacking for far too long. Mitchell, though still emotionally bruised, was starting to regain his confidence. He had spent so many years living in Emma's shadow, listening to her, believing her lies. But now he was beginning to see clearly again. And Moren, she had always been the backbone of the company, but now she felt freer than she had in years. Sitting at her desk in the quiet office, Moren couldn't help but smile. It was a bittersweet feeling, this new chapter. There was so much pain in the past, so many moments that Emma had twisted, so many betrayals that had torn at the fabric of the family. But now, for the first time in a long time, Moren felt like she could breathe again. She wasn't living in fear anymore. She wasn't walking on eggshells, wondering when Emma would strike next. She had her son by her side, and they were rebuilding, together. The company was starting to show signs of recovery. Moren and Mitchell had already met with the board of directors and shared their vision for the future. It wasn't an easy sell, but they were determined to prove that the company could thrive again without the toxic influence of Emma. The clients were cautiously optimistic, but they had a long road ahead of them. There were still rumors about the company's recent turmoil, and many people had questions, but Moren was ready to face them. She had fought too hard for this company to let it slip away now. "Mitch, we're going to make it," Moren said quietly one evening as they sat together, going over some paperwork. Mitchell looked up at her, his face softening with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. It had been a long journey, and there were still days when the weight of the past felt unbearable, but he could feel it. Something had shifted. They had made it through the worst of it, and now the future seemed full of possibilities. "I know," Mitchell replied, his voice steady, though tinged with the pain of everything they had lost. "But we've got a long road ahead of us. I've still got a lot to make up for. I've spent so much time listening to the wrong person." Moren reached out and placed her hand on his. "We all make mistakes, Mitchell. You were only trying to do what you thought was right. You were just lost for a while. But we're here now and we're going to rebuild it together. We've got each other, and that's the most important thing." The words brought him comfort, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. The damage to their family had been immense, and healing the emotional wounds would take time. But they had each other, and that was something they hadn't had for so long. As the weeks went by, Maren found herself settling into a new rhythm. The company was beginning to show positive signs of growth. They had revamped their marketing strategy, reaching out to old clients and finding new opportunities. The business was recovering, and Maren felt a new sense of strength. She wasn't the same person she had been before Emma came into their lives. The woman who had once been uncertain and constantly looking over her shoulder had disappeared. Now Moren was in control. She didn't need anyone to tell her what to do, didn't need anyone to validate her decisions. She had been through the worst, and she had come out stronger on the other side. One evening, as Mitchell sat across from her, going over some projections for the company's future, he looked up at her and smiled. "You know, I've been thinking, this whole experience, it's changed everything for me. I've learned more than I ever could have imagined about myself, about the company, and about us." Moren gave him a soft smile in return. "I think I've learned a lot too. Sometimes it takes going through the worst to realize what really matters." Mitchell leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "I don't think I ever truly appreciated what you've done for me, for the company. I was so focused on the future, on trying to make things work in my own way, that I lost sight of the most important thing: family. You've always been the one who kept this company together, even when things were tough. I'm sorry I didn't see that before." Moren's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a deep sense of peace. "It's all right, Mitchell. We've both been through a lot, but we've come out stronger, and that's what matters." She stood up, walking over to the window, gazing out at the city below. The skyline had always been a symbol of the company's growth, of their dreams. It had been a long and difficult journey, but now, looking out at the lights flickering in the distance, Maren felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid. They were going to rebuild. They were going to make the company stronger than it had ever been, and nothing, no one, could stop them now. For the first time in years, Moren felt the freedom to dream again, no longer under Emma's control, no longer bound by the fear of being pushed aside. She could finally embrace her own vision for the future. The weight had lifted from her shoulders, and with Mitchell by her side, she was ready to take on whatever came next. As the days passed, Maren began to put her plans into action. She began reaching out to old colleagues, old friends, and clients. She reestablished relationships, rebuilt trust, and slowly, the company began to recover. It wasn't without its challenges, but every day she felt a little stronger, a little more confident. The road to recovery was still long, but Maren knew that they were on the right path now. Emma was no longer in their lives, and with that, the shadow that had loomed over everything was gone. There was only the future now, full of promise, full of hope, and Moren was determined to face it head-on. The office was quiet, the usual hustle and bustle of business replaced by a sense of calm that had eluded Moren for so long. The weight of the past few months, the betrayal by Emma, the tension between her and Mitchell, the uncertainty about the future, everything had seemed insurmountable. But now, as she sat in her office, the sun casting a warm glow through the windows, Moren felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The company was beginning to recover. Business was picking up again and clients were returning. There was a long way to go before things were truly back to normal, but Moren was beginning to see the first signs of hope. Mitchell was working harder than ever, helping her rebuild the company and restore the trust that had been shattered. The damage done by Emma was still fresh, still painful, but they were moving forward together, one step at a time. Moren had always known that the road to recovery wouldn't be easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she felt the weight of everything she had lost. But as she looked across the office at Mitchell, there was a sense of pride swelling in her chest. He was no longer the man she had feared would be lost to her forever. He had come back to her, to their family, and together they were rebuilding everything they had once dreamed of. "Mom?" Mitchell said one afternoon as they sat in the conference room, going over the latest financial reports. "I just want to thank you again for sticking by me, for not giving up on me. I know I let you down, but I swear I'll never let anyone come between us again. Not Emma, not anyone." Moren smiled softly, her heart warmed by his words. "We've both made mistakes, Mitchell, but the important thing is that we're here now. We're together, and we'll make this work. The company, our family, it all matters." The words Maren spoke weren't just for Mitchell, they were for herself as well. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of the family business on her shoulders, trying to keep everything together, trying to make everyone happy. She had lost sight of her own needs, her own desires. But now she was starting to realize that it was okay to let go, to take a step back, and to let Mitchell take the lead. He was ready. He was strong enough to handle the responsibility, and it was time for her to embrace the future with him. As the weeks passed, they continued to work together, rebuilding the company's reputation and ensuring that they learned from the mistakes of the past. Moren was no longer living under the constant shadow of Emma's manipulations. There were no more late-night phone calls filled with lies, no more feeling like she had to compete for Mitchell's attention. He was hers again, and they were united in a way they hadn't been in years. But even as Maren found herself regaining her footing, she couldn't help but acknowledge that the journey wasn't over. The emotional scars from Emma's betrayal would take time to heal. There were days when Mitchell would retreat into himself, lost in thought, still grappling with the realization that everything he had believed in had been a lie. He had trusted Emma, had loved her, and yet she had torn their family apart for the sake of power and control. Moren knew it would take time for him to fully forgive himself for allowing Emma to manipulate him for so long. But despite the lingering pain, there was a renewed sense of unity between them. Moren had always been the matriarch of their family, the one who held everything together. But now, she wasn't doing it alone. Mitchell had found his way back to her, and together, they were building something stronger than before. One evening, as they sat together in the family home, sharing a quiet dinner, Mitchell turned to Maren with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we need to move forward. I'm committed to that, Mom. I'm not going to let anyone tear this family apart again, not even myself." Moren smiled at him, her heart full. "I know you won't. We've been through so much together, and I believe in you. We'll get through this, Mitchell. We're stronger than ever." The words felt like a promise, a pact between them. No matter what came next, they would face it together. The scars from Emma's betrayal would always be there, but they no longer had to define their future. Mitchell and Maren were in control now. They were rebuilding not just the company, but their bond as mother and son, something that Emma had almost destroyed. As Moren sat back in her chair, watching Mitchell laugh as he shared a story from his childhood, she realized that this was what she had fought for. This was the future she had always wanted for them, a future where they were united, where they supported each other, and where nothing, not even the darkest of betrayals, could break them apart. The next day, as they walked into the office together, Moren felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. The company was beginning to flourish again, but more importantly, their family was healing. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer held them hostage. They were moving forward, and for the first time in a long time, Moren could breathe easy. She looked over at Mitchell, who was busy speaking with a few employees. He had changed. He was no longer the man who had been lost in Emma's world. He was taking charge, and she was proud of him. She had raised a strong, capable son, and now they would face the future together, side by side. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past resurfaced and made them question everything. But as they walked through the door of the company together, Moren realized that they had already won. They had rebuilt. They had come out stronger on the other side, and now the only thing left to do was to keep moving forward. The company, their family, and their legacy were theirs to create, and nothing, not even the most manipulative forces, could take that away.